Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 7, 8, 8X, and 9 of Fire Emblem Thracia 776. Now, before I get started with anything else, I want to apologize because I forgot to do the map gauntlet last episode, and uh, part of it I don't think was necessary because I think I made it pretty clear which of those four maps I liked the best. It was chapter 6 for sure, but what I didn't do was compare it to chapter 3, which was the winner of the first Thracia episode. So I'm going to do that right now. I think that this is an interesting comparison because I think they're both good maps, but I think they do completely different things well. Chapter 3, I think, is great because it has a lot of side objectives and a lot of great anti-turtling incentives that the player is actually going to be encountering and having to deal with. Whereas Chapter 6 does have anti-turtling incentives, but you're probably not actually going to have to deal with them at all because it's pretty easy to get out of the city before the reinforcements catch up with you. So as far as anti-turtling incentives go, I guess that like it exists in the fact that, now that I think about it, I guess that argument doesn't really hold water, right? Because I guess the thing is for me, like it doesn't make me go any faster than I normally would, at least not by a lot. Like you can take it at a pretty casual pace and still manage to escape with plenty of time to spare. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a great anti-turtling incentive, whereas the chapter 3 one is like you really got to be on top of it and go pretty quickly or else you're going to lose either the villages or the chests up north or both. So for that reason, I think that chapter 3 is better in that regard. But on the other hand, chapter 6 is just like a lot more interesting of a map, I think. There's two distinct different ways to play through it, although one of them is really boring. It is there, I guess, as an option. There's just generally more going on, I think. There's more tension there, like just narratively and mechanically, because it is an escape map and you are trying to escape. You're trying to hightail it out of there. So there's a little bit more tension and excitement in what you're actually doing in the map. Galzus being there is a cool set piece that hammers home like, oh shit, we really got to get out of here. Like if you see Galzus and you like hover over him and you look at his stats, then you are going to shit yourself, and that's a really cool experience. I think that a lot of people, especially playing through the game for the first time, maybe taking things a little bit more slowly, would not, they would not get out in time before Galzus shows up, and that's got to be like a really cool. I think that happened to me, although I don't really remember. I think I knew Galzus was coming, which is kind of a disappointment. That is one of the few things so far that I can say is actually improved about this game. Playing blind is that you don't know Galzus is coming, and then he shows up, and you're like, oh my god. But for the most part, it's generally not as interesting. I don't think it's more interesting conceptually, but at the end of the day, I think I find Chapter 3 a little bit more fun to play. So while it is close, I am going to give it to Chapter 3. So Chapter 3 is still our number one map of Thracia for the moment. And we'll see if this changes at all going into this episode. So last episode, I asked you guys to respond on Twitter with your opinions on what the best map objective in Fire Emblem was. And I didn't get a lot of response over on Twitter, but I did get some good responses on Discord from my Discord friends, so I'm going to talk about some of those here as well. At Biozilla on Twitter said, I have no particular favorite type and prefer a good variety of map objectives in a Fire Emblem game. That being said, if every defend map was like Tara in FE5, they would hands down be my favorite type. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Tara specifically because I'm going to get to that map eventually and I want to talk about it there. But I think that defend is probably also mine. It's interesting, right? And it's kind of a bad question in my opinion, honestly. Like after seeing these responses, it kind of occurred to me that it's kind of a weird question to ask because at the end of the day, I think any objective can be really good or really bad, depending on how it's used. Like at the end of the day, it's just about the quality of the map, right? A good map with a seize objective is not necessarily going to be any better or worse than a good map with an escape objective or a good map with a defend objective. I will say that defend is probably also my favorite objective, but only in instances where it actually makes you feel like you're being crushed like from all sides. It's really easy, and you see this a lot in like FE7 to have a map that's a defend map that is just so easy that you end up killing all the enemies before the turn limit's up. Which is why I think a lot of people prefer when it's paired with like an optional kill boss like alternative. If you kill the boss, it ends the map early, which I don't necessarily think is bad, but I think that in an ideal world, it wouldn't need to be that way because I feel like a perfect defend map is one that actually makes you feel like you are being pushed to the brink, just trying to hold out against the enemies around you. And I think Chapter 14 in FE5, which is what BioZilla was talking about here, is a pretty good example of that. But that's all I'm going to say about that because, again, I will talk about Chapter 14 when we get there. But yeah, for now, suffice it to say that if every defend map was that extent of making you feel like you're actually in a threatening situation, then yeah, it would also be my favorite hands down. A couple others said defend as well over on Discord. Quite a few people said escape. I think escape was probably the one that I saw the most, and I can see why. I think it's a nice spin on basically what is essentially just C's. I think that a lot of games just treat it basically like C's, like FE9 essentially is it's just C's. Usually easier than C's because there's typically not a boss covering the escape point. So if you can get Ike there, you can just, seize it. But the other thing, though, about the Tellius games, and this also applies to FE5, although obviously it's a lot more intense in FE5, is that you are actually incentivized to escape with all of your characters and not just your lord. In FE5, you kind of have to, unless you're okay with leaving them behind. But in Tellius, you are usually given some extra bonus experience if you escape with your other characters. It's not necessary, but it's a nice way to incentivize you to not just treat it like a C's map. You actually have to get all of your characters to the end and have them get out, and that's cool. It differentiates it from being a C's map, in that like no person can be left behind and you actually have to like plan around getting your slower units or your weaker units to the end of the map to get all the possible rewards. And that's pretty neat. I think that it's escape is also up there for me. I think it's probably my second favorite behind defend. I also think that escape is generally a lot more consistent. Like I don't think that there are really any escape maps that are bad because they're escape maps, whereas defend maps, there are some defend maps that are like really bad because they are defend maps. Like a bad defend map is much worse than a bad escape map, but a good escape map is not as good as a good defend map. Is kind of how I would put it. But to each their own. I saw C's pop up a couple times. The other Twitter reply was from Super User Person, and I think at the time they had a Marth avatar. Right now it's a Gintama avatar, so the statement doesn't really apply anymore. I don't think. I've never watched Gintama though. So they said, don't know if you could tell by the Avi, but I'm a big fan of C's with middling or weak lords. So yeah, Shadow Dragon C's is great. I think that like most of the time I'm just kind of okay with C's. It's pretty neutral overall, but I think it's at its worst when you just like juggernaut your way through the map with the Lord, and then it's basically just like a route map, or you know, like there's no danger or no excitement there because your Lord is just gonna plow through all the enemies and get to the end and seize. But in Shadow Dragon, where Marth is generally so weak and he needs a lot of support to get to the end and seize, that's pretty interesting. And I think Shadow Dragon is a great game for that reason alone, because Marth being a bad unit is really interesting and requires you to come up with a lot of cool strategies to figure out how to facilitate him getting to the end, whether that be, escorting him with your good units or having Sita fly to the boss and kill him and then warp Marth to the throne, whatever it may be. Marth being a liability rather than an asset turns the entire C's objective on its head, which is great. I think pretty much everyone agrees that Route is the worst. I don't think I saw a single person say Route was the best, and I think I saw a handful of people say Route is the worst. And I saw a couple kill bosses. Kill boss is I'm kind of like neutral on kill boss. I think it's like fine usually. It's a nice test of skill if you can like the thing about kill boss maps is that they're usually so easy, right? Like if you have anyone that can use warp in most games, you just warp a strong unit to the end and kill the boss and then it's over, which can be fun. And in like late game three houses, it can be like a real fun experience, like trying to figure out, okay, well, if I dance this character and I use stride on this character and I warp this character and rescue with this other character, it's this whole like, can you set up the perfect one turn boss kill strat? That's pretty fun. But in some games, especially ones where the boss is just like close to where you start off the map, like I think FE8 Chapter 19 is a great example of this, although that is technically a defend map. It's basically a kill boss map because you can just warp a strong unit into the fog, and if you know where Reeve is, and just kill Reeve, and it's just like there's no penalty for doing that whatsoever. It's an extremely easy map, which I don't know. I think that's kind of lame. So, other than route, I think kill boss is probably my least favorite, but I can see where the appeal comes from. It can be fun if done well to like see if you can set up the right strategy to accomplish it. So thanks to everyone who responded to that question. For next episode, what I want to know is I've been doing a lot of thinking about Fire Emblem romhacks recently, and there are a few good ones out there that I'm familiar with. I've played a couple. I don't think I've ever beaten one though, and I want to know if you guys have ever played any Fire Emblem romhacks, and if so, which ones did you like? Which is your favorite? Maybe even give me some ones that you didn't like and that you think I should avoid. I'm thinking about trying to get into some of them. I've played like Staff of Ages, and what was the other one that I played? Last Promise. I don't think I beat either of them. I don't think I even got super far in either of them, but I liked them well enough from what I did get to from where I did get in them. Well, I know that nowadays I think Staff of Ages is like finished where it wasn't when I played it. I think there's also like Midnight Sun, Bloodlines, the Fargast, Rom Hack is like coming back or something like that. I don't know. So yeah, let me know if there are any good Fire Emblem ROM hacks that you enjoy, and I'll check them out. So the last thing that I want to talk about before we actually start discussing the chapters we played this episode is I got a message from Biozilla talking about a really cool fan theory that I had never heard about before, but I wanted to share with you guys because I thought it was interesting. I'll put a link to the image in the description, but basically, they shared this image, which is a shot of the end of chapter 4, where Manfroy, Veld, Ishtar, and Julius all were talking about, the evil things that they were discussing. And there are 4 stone statues in that room, and I had never actually noticed this before. I had no idea that they were even there. And I'm sure that you can see where I'm going with this. This is clearly like there's no way that it wasn't intentionally put in there at the very least to like foreshadow what was about to happen to Avel. There are some theories that they are like actual characters from Gen 1. I believe there was like Lex, Era, Azel, and I don't remember the last one. Let me check. Lachesis was the last one. I'm kind of conflicted on how I feel about this because on the one hand, I think it's really cool, and I definitely don't think it's a coincidence that they were put here right before we got the Avel being turned to stone situation. I definitely think that it was intentionally put in there as like foreshadowing, and then on repeat visits to the game, you could be like, oh, hey, I wonder if this has anything to do with what's about to happen. And I think it's certainly possible. Like, I'm not ruling out the idea, but what I do find a little weird is that, August specifically points out that there are rumors that these statues are being kept in the Yi Desert, which I mean, I don't know why they would draw attention to that specifically if it wasn't like if it's true and the Crusaders or the Sigurd's army people were turned to stone. I don't know why they would draw attention to them being in the Yi Desert only for them to like actually be somewhere entirely different. Especially since we know that Lachesis, like if Lachesis was turned to stone, it was almost definitely while she was crossing the Yi Desert. Like that is definitely the implication that they were going for with that whole subplot of her like dying while she was crossing the desert. So I don't know how she would have ended up in Manster, But on the other hand, I do think that it is certainly a possibility. And again, I think that it was put there intentionally for whatever reason. Biozilla, I don't know if they came up with this aspect of it or if this is something that they heard. I had never ever heard of this theory actually, so I don't know how much of it is their own creation, how much of it they picked up from other places. But Biozilla did also mention that it may be some kind of like blackmail plot against the noble families across the continent because all of the people there are like members of nobility. Lex is obviously a member of House Dozle. Lachesis is part of Nordian, and then Azel is Veltimer, and what's his face? Aera is part of the Isaacian royal family. So I don't know. I like that part in particular. I definitely don't really buy because it doesn't really make sense, especially Azel. Like I don't know why they would want to blackmail Arvis. Like I guess, especially since it seems like this is more of a Manfroy thing, and Manfroy wasn't exactly on Arvis's side. So I could see it. But then like Aera, like Isaac is already dethroned at this point, and the entire royal family is dead. And Shannon doesn't seem to know about this, so it doesn't seem like it would be blackmail for him. Not to mention, all of these guys were considered like traitors and disgraces, especially Lex. Like Lex fought House Dozel, and presumably would have been like considered an enemy by Danon. Lacusis is the only one that I could actually see being there as like some form of blackmail against House Nordian, since they presumably still exist over in Augustria. But the other three, I don't really see that being like a feasible explanation for what they're doing there. And I already explained why I don't think Lachesis would be in Manster in the first place, as opposed to the desert. So that part of the theory, I'm a little bit shakier on. But I do think that there's something to be said for these guys like being fallen heroes, or at the very least, just like people who were turned into stone, maybe members of the Magi group or something like that. Because I definitely think that they were put there intentionally. They aren't just like all the same statue either. Like they are very clearly meant to be like different people in different classes and stuff like that. So it's not just like a generic statue design that's sprinkled throughout the room. They are clearly meant to be different, distinct statues, and I think that that is absolutely meant to be foreshadowing what's about to happen to Avel. So, Biozilla, thank you so much for bringing that to my attention because I was really interested by it. I never heard it before, so I wanted to share that with you guys because I have a feeling that I'm not the only one. I'm not alone. So, yeah, I hope that you found that interesting as I did. So, with all of that out of the way, I think we can go ahead and get into our chapters for the episode, starting with chapter 7, The Shield of Thracia. So at the end of last chapter, Leif had escaped from the city of Manster, but he is still not out of the woods yet. He's being pursued by the Empire soldiers and still needs to escape. And they're kind of like at a loss. Leif is like, I don't know where we're really going to go. And August suggests that he flees south towards Thracia and ask them for help. Now, Leif is uh, quite justifiably off put by this idea. He gets very angry and, is like, hey, those guys killed my parents. They are responsible for a lot of what's happening to my country right now. You can't expect me to just go and, like, ask them to help me out. And August has one of my favorite lines in the game so far here, where he says, do you expect to fight off the Empire with the strength of your pride alone? At the end of last chapter, Leif mentioned that he was willing to do whatever it took to beat the Empire, and August is like, "Did you think that that wouldn't include shit like this?" I think Leif maybe just kind of meant it as like, I would put my life on the line, I would, put my life in danger, and work as hard as I needed to in battle to make this happen. But August is like, listen, this is part of that too. If you're really willing to do anything, then you need to be willing to do anything to fight off the Empire. Leif is kind of skeptical still. He says that, like, even if I agreed to this, why do you think that they would even help me? Aren't they supposed to be allies with the Empire? And August kind of gives us a little bit more context into the situation, where he says that Thracia and the Empire are technically allies, but they're not exactly, like, on good terms. And he believes that the General Hannibal, who is, one of the most important people in Thracia would fight against the Empire if, he had the opportunity to. So Leif agrees to go for it. They're going to head down to Hannibal's home of Meath. And then while they're talking about it, they decide that their next destination should be the city of Tara. They've decided that it is time to go and help them out because they are, as we found out last episode, the final remaining free city in the Manster district. So it seems like as good of a place as any to stage a counterattack towards the Empire. And this is where the map starts. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is there are two paths you can take down this map. One leads to the left through some mountains and through some enemies. The second path heads to the right, or I should say down on the right side, and there's really nothing stopping you from going down this way. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But at the bottom of the map, there's a group of mercenaries or myrmidons, whatever you want to call them, and they are being, I guess not being led, but among them is Shiva, who is a character who we remember from Chapter 2X. I actually don't know what happens if you didn't go to Chapter 2X. Like, I'm pretty sure you still get Safi, but I don't know if you can recruit Shiva if you didn't go to 2X. There's a lot of stuff in this game that is, like, dependent on you going to the Gaiden chapters. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if you actually couldn't recruit Shiva if you didn't go to 2X. But I don't really know. I just kind of assumed that they let you do it anyway. So when choosing how to tackle this map, you might think, okay, well, I have two options here. I can go down the left path and fight some enemies and take a longer time, or I could go down the right path and have it be an easier time and not fight as many enemies. So there's got to be some kind of incentive for going left, right? Because otherwise there would be no point in going left. You could just go to the right path every single time and it would be way easier. And you're correct, because that is exactly what the situation is. There is no reason at all to go to the left path other than if you want some extra experience, which is fair. There's a lot of enemies there that would be nice to get rid of and get some levels off of. But I'm not exactly strapped for experience right now, especially since I'm playing on Paragon mode. So going the right path is pretty much exclusively the best option. I usually go the left path. I don't really know why. It was pointed out to me playing this playthrough that there is no incentive to go to the left path, and the only reason that you would ever do it is to get more experience. So I decided to take the right path this time, and it worked out a lot better. So there is actually one reason to take the left path, but it's very easy to circumvent, so it doesn't really count. And I'll explain that in just a moment. Now, there are a couple houses, and I think one of them just gives you a Master Seal, but the other one gives you an Antitoxin, which is like, oh, woo, Antitoxin. If you've played like FE7 or FE8, whenever you've gotten an Antitoxin, you're probably like, oh, awesome, free gold, or less room in my supply convoy, right? It's pretty much useless in that game, or in those games, I should say, because poison only lasts a few turns, and it doesn't really do that much anyway, so it's whatever. In this game, though, Antitoxin is actually quite nice because in this game, every status lasts the entire map unless you use something to heal yourself, whether that be an antitoxin or in the case of like sleep and berserk, you can use a restore staff because otherwise you're going to be poisoned the entire map. And that can be really frustrating for sure. Staying poisoned does actually have its advantages because staff rank is really important in this game, and having chip damage every turn that you can heal off with like Safi or something to build up her staff rank and her experience is nice. But if you just want to like not have to worry about it, then antitoxin are actually a pretty good item. Still not that great, but much better than they are in most other games at least. So after a turn or two, we cut to our destination, which is Meath, and Hannibal is there. Apparently, he's been away for a while, and his knight is kind of catching him up on what's been going on. Apparently, they apprehended some people crossing the mountains, and those people claimed to be travelers, but the knight suspected that there was more to it than that, so he decided to put them under arrest. Unfortunately, though, a couple of those travelers have escaped, and Hannibal or his soldier say that they're going to go after him or something like that. I don't know. but that's not important really. What we do find out though here is that we cut to Finn and Safi. So we can infer from this that the group of travelers that was apprehended by Hannibal's men were actually the remnants of Leif's group that escaped at the end of chapter 3. So Finn and Safi managed to get out, and they talk a little bit about, like Finn's like, oh, you didn't have to come with me, and Safi's like, oh, I want to help Leif as well, so yada yada yada. Just generally reaffirming that she wants to be a part of Leif's group to help Tara. And so they end up on the bottom left corner of the map, at the bottom of the right path, or the bottom of the left path, I should say. Now, this is the incentive to go down the left path that I was talking about because Shiva is recruitable in this map. What you need to do is you need to talk to him with Safi. If you go down the right path with your group, then Shiva and his army will come north and move away from Safi. Whereas if you kind of move down the left path or you kind of back up a little bit, Shiva and his Myrmidon crew will start attacking Finn and Safi, which I always thought made them easier to recruit. But what I didn't really think about is that you can just have your northern group kill all the mercenaries except Shiva, and then just have Shiva like capture someone or attack someone who doesn't have their weapons, so they can't fight back and kill Shiva. There are a lot of ways to just hold Shiva there until Safi comes up and is able to recruit him. He also, sometimes if he manages to capture like Lara or something, he will try to escape from the bottom section, like where you are also able to escape. So he'll start heading back down towards Safi anyway. So there's a lot of ways to have your group take the right path and still recruit Shiva. So whichever you want to do, it's really up to you. But this is the only reason that I thought you might want to take the left path, and it is null and void if you know how to manipulate enemy AI, so whatever, I guess. About this time, we see Raedric show up with a boss, a mini boss, and he commands them to go after Leif, and this starts turn after turn after turn of Cavalier reinforcements spawning. I believe they're infinite, or close to it at least. They go on for a very, very long time. And they all have rapiers, so it's a nice opportunity to get some rapiers because they're not very common and they're a really good weapon type. But they are really annoying to get rid of, and they just keep coming and coming and coming. So, what a lot of people opt to do is to put a unit onto the tile where the mini boss is supposed to spawn. And if you do that, the mini boss never spawns, and he does not have to be killed because killing him stops the reinforcements. But if you put someone where he's supposed to spawn and he never shows up in the first place, then the game considers him dead and the reinforcements, well, there's one wave of reinforcements that comes, but everything after that is not, they do not appear. So that's a pretty common strategy. I did it this time. It works out pretty well. You can also just kill the boss. Like, I don't think he's super hard to kill, but it's probably easier to just kill him that way. Now, during this cutscene where Raedric is talking to the mini boss, he mentions that under absolutely no circumstances are they allowed to fight Hannibal. Like, if Hannibal comes out and starts fighting on the battlefield, they have to leave because Leif, like, not even getting Leif is worth starting war with Thracia, essentially, is what Raedric boils it down to. And so that's kind of hinting that, like, I think I've never seen this happen, but I think if the reinforcements get close enough to Hannibal's house or his city or whatever, then Hannibal will send out some NPCs to fight, and then that will cause the enemy reinforcements to run away. I'm pretty sure that's what's supposed to happen, although like I said, I've never seen it because I usually just kill the boss immediately, either by actually killing him or by spawn killing him by putting someone on the tile where he's supposed to spawn. But that's a pretty cool interaction, and it kind of puts into perspective the Empire's kind of precarious relationship with Thracia. The fact that they're willing to give up Leif if Hannibal even so much thinks about fighting them is, that's surprising because Leif is like the number one priority right now. He's the only person in the entire world, really, that could inspire the people of the Manster district to fight back. So you would think that he would be like their number one priority, but apparently maintaining good relations with Thracia is even more important to them. So let's talk about Shiva, because I mentioned you can recruit him with Safi, but I never actually talked about him as a unit or as a character. I am flabbergasted at how shitty of a character he is. So this is kind of a recurring character dynamic that comes up in the series multiple times, where the kind-hearted maiden and the edgy sword master type character are, they hit it off, and she brings out the best in him, and he can see that she's, a pure-hearted maiden who, is the only person who could ever make him not like kill things left and right. It happens with like Sita and Navarre. It happens with Raven and Priscilla, although that one's a little bit different. Kind of, it's weird. Clarine and Rutger is another one. It happens a lot. And usually these characters have a little bit more going on. Like Clarine is a little bit of she's definitely like a maiden or whatever, but she's got an attitude. Sita has like a bit of a manipulative streak going on with her, as we'll see when we get to Shadow Dragon. But not so with Safi, and not really so with Navarre either. I think that the best way to put it is that these two are the purest distillations of their archetypes that have ever existed. Safi is truly the platonic ideal of the naive, pure-hearted healer girl at the beginning of the game, and Shiva is the platonic ideal of the edgy sword master who, is so angry all the time, and he wants to kill things, but the kind-hearted maiden pulls him out of his suffering, and he's very edgy. That's really the long and short of it, is that he's just not a very interesting character. He's just an edge lord. That's really all there is to it. I don't care for him very much. As a gameplay unit, though, he's pretty cool. He has a really high base speed, although his speed growth is only like 30%, which I thought was weird. But his speed base is high enough, especially if you combine it with like the said scroll, to make him pretty fast. He's a sword master, he joins with the killing edge. He can get a pretty high sword rank. He has soul, so he can like heal himself sometimes. That's pretty cool. What else? He promotes the sword master, which is nice. I don't know if they get a crit bonus in this game. They might. I'm not sure. I don't know. I feel like if you've seen Shiva once, you've seen him 100 times. If you've seen Rutger, if you've seen Navarre, if you've seen Lonku, that sort of deal, then you've pretty much seen him. You pretty much know all about Shiva, both in character and in gameplay. He is basically identical to all of those guys that I've just listed. So there are a couple of conversations that we can get in this map. One between Leif and Finn, and the other between Nana and Finn. The Leif and Finn conversation isn't really noteworthy other than two things that I thought were interesting. First of all, Leif, despite August saying that there's really no chance of it, Leif is still privately holding on to the hope that he can free Avel from being turned into stone. So I thought that that was interesting, despite August really like trying to hammer home, like, listen, she is gone. You cannot save her. You gotta just move on and accept that she's basically dead. Leif is not quite ready to give her up yet, which is fair. He did describe her as being like a second mother to him. So I would be a little bit surprised if he was able to just let it go that easily. The other thing is just something that I thought was funny. Leif is asking Finn, like, hey, where's the rest of our group? And Leif explains that they were captured by Hannibal's men, and says that when he escaped, he considered rescuing them, but because he's so loyal to Leif, he just fucking dipped out of there. He was like, no, I gotta save Leif. I gotta go link up with Leif, and the rest of them can just go fuck themselves. I don't know. I feel like I get that Finn's a really loyal knight, but I feel like that's just kind of a dick move. Um, like the rest of them end up being fine, right? Like Hannibal's a good dude, but I guess like Finn doesn't know that. I'm assuming that he has the same opinions on Thracia that Leif does, so he's probably just thinking that he's leaving the rest of them there to die, and that's kind of fucked up, right? Like he fought alongside these guys. He was with them in Fianna for a long time. I'm trying to remember. It's just Halvin and Orson and Ronan. Those are the only ones I think. So Ronan, I can kind of understand. He met Ronan like a week ago, but Orson and Halvin, they were chill. I think so. That's kind of a dick move, but whatever. I guess not every character can be perfect, so understandable, Finn. And the Finn and Nana conversation isn't really that interesting. So it's just him being like, "Oh, I'm glad you're safe." She does refer to him as father, so that's kind of like confirmation that that she considers him like a father figure at the very least. I don't think that this makes it canon that she is his actual daughter in the same way that it is canon that said is Lewin's son, but I do think it is a strong argument because she, like, regardless, he did raise her. Like, that is a fact. No matter who her actual father was, she was raised by Finn. So he's definitely like an adoptive father, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's her biological father, for whatever that's worth. Because I know a lot of people interpret this to mean that she is canonically his daughter. I don't think that that's necessarily true. Now, unless you decide to fuck around with the left group of enemies, that's basically it. This chapter is really short and easy, and I don't care for it all that much just because it's like really simple. But if you do decide to go and try to fight the left group of enemies, it can be kind of interesting. They're tough. I think there's a promoted enemy in there somewhere, like a berserker. So he's a little bit tricky to handle. But otherwise, you really shouldn't have any problems. It's kind of another one of those like you can choose your approach, and one approach is way more interesting, and the other approach is really boring. But at least in this instance, the game doesn't like push you in one direction over the other. So I'm not gonna hold that against it the same way I did chapter 6. So Leif escapes and links up with Hannibal. He basically makes up a bullshit story about what he's actually doing. He says that he's a rebel fighting against the Empire, and Hannibal is like, "Oh, okay." And he lets go of Orson, Halvin, and Ronan, then also gives a little bit of extra aid. He gives a soldier to Leif by the name of Carrion. Leif kind of puts up a fight about it and is like, "Hey, listen, you don't have to go that far. I appreciate the help, but we'll be okay." But Carrion insists. He chimes in, is like, "No, I really want to come with you guys." And Leif eventually gives in here. So Carrion has joined the group, and we'll talk about him when we get to play with him next chapter. Now, if you rescued Corporal in chapter 3, then you get an extra little scene here where Corporal basically shows up and thanks you for what you did for him and gives you a warp staff. Now, let's talk about this because I mentioned this last episode, but warp is the most broken thing in this game. It's broken in a lot of games and it can trivialize a lot of games, especially like FE11 is notorious for this. But FE5 is probably the game where warp is at its most powerful because there's so many side objectives that are easier to secure with warp. A lot of maps are seize maps, so you can just warp Leaf to the end and have him, kill an enemy. There's a lot of great reasons to just spam warp, and by the later half of the game, pretty much every map you can warp skip, either by, if it's a defend map where you can kill the boss, or if it's a seize map, or something like that. There's pretty much no reason to not just always use warp. But I did mention last episode that we aren't going to be warp skipping this game like a lot of people choose to. The rationale behind that is that the point of this podcast is to experience every map. And you can't really experience a map if you just warp skip it in one turn. I want to see, like, are there reinforcements? Are there side objectives that are interesting to complete? Are there is there anything interesting about the route that you have to take to get through the map? Stuff like that. And warp skipping really invalidates a lot of that. I think especially the Reinhardt map towards the end of the game is like a pain in the ass that you can just warp skip and a lot of people choose to. Not to mention like it's just so easy to warp skip because it's not like if you warp on the first turn of a map a boss killer to the boss, and that person has a chance to kill the boss, you can just reset until you get the luck you need. So pretty much every map is a guaranteed one turn if you just rig it a lot. And I don't know, it's just like I'm fine doing that like in my own personal like casual playthroughs. I do it all the time. When I played through this game for the first time, I warp skipped like every map in the late game. But I want to experience this game the way that it was meant to be experienced. And you can argue that, yeah, warp is intentionally designed this way, and I'm still going to use warp. There are instances where there are like villages that you need to rescue, or there's like a chapter coming up where you need to get rid of the boss early, or else he's going to spam sleep staffs on your entire group. Like, I'm going to use warp pretty liberally to make things easier on myself. I'm just not going to warp skip, and I don't really have like an operational definition for what warp skipping is in this context. I'm just kind of gonna play it by ear and see like what makes the most sense for any given map. But just like, if whatever you're imagining in your head as warp skipping, then you're probably, you know, whatever you're thinking of, that's what I'm not going to do, basically, is what I'm trying to say here. But regardless, it is nice to have a warp staff. Safi can't quite use it yet, but as soon as she promotes, she will be able to. So we got to get her a Master Seal pretty soon. I gave the first one to Asvel, and I think I gave the second one to, I think Fergus is who it was. Well, Safi's probably coming up next because having an A rank staff user is pretty valuable. And that is the end of chapter 7. So we can go ahead and move into chapter 8, which is called Mount Violdrake. So the setup for this map is pretty simple. They're heading west through the mountains to get to Tara, and it just so happens that in order to get to Tara, you have to pass through where Dagdar is from. So that's how they get caught up in this. It doesn't explain what the actual conflict of the map is quite yet. All we know is that there's some kind of battle going on here, and we have to, pick units to deploy. Which brings us to the first major difference of this map, which is that we are being given the prep screen for the first time, which is insane that it took this long. I think this is the longest that any game makes you go without a prep screen, because I think the second longest is like, okay, well, I guess you don't have no, you have preps in Lin mode. I'm trying to think. I think the second longest would be like I think Lin mode you get them in like chapter 7. FE6 I think gives them to you in chapter 6. So no other game comes quite this close. You have to go, if you count the guidance chapters, then you have to go 9 maps without a prep screen, which is crazy. But we finally have it now, and with this prep screen, you're going to notice there's actually quite a few differences from how most games handle preps. For one thing, there is something that no other game has in the entire series, as far as I'm aware, minimum deployment. In every map, obviously, you have like a maximum number of units you can deploy, I guess except FE4. But what no other game does is make you deploy a minimum number of characters. In most games, you have to deploy your main lord, and obviously, and even in like auxiliary battles where you don't have to deploy your main lord, you have to deploy at least one character because otherwise you wouldn't be able to fight. So technically, there is always a minimum. It's usually one or maybe two or three, depending on how many lords you have. But for the most part, you don't have a minimum in the same way that this game does. In this game, every map there's usually a minimum of like at least I want to say like 4 to 8 somewhere in there. Some maps have like really high minimum deployments, so you have to deploy a lot of characters all the time. Some maps have a low minimum deployment, so you can get away with just deploying like a handful. Either way, you need to deploy at least a few characters in every map. Now, most of the time, this isn't really an issue because you're going to want to deploy a lot of characters anyway, so it's not super notable outside of one example, which we're going to get to way later, but it's not really something you're going to notice a lot of the time. The other major thing that you're going to notice is that some characters will have a status on this screen called fatigue. Fatigue is a mechanic that has it's very controversial. It has a lot of people who like it and a lot of people who don't like it, and a lot of people who are kind of in the middle. I'm mostly neutral on it. I like it, or sorry, I dislike it conceptually, but I also understand the appeal. So basically, what fatigue is a stat. It's not a hidden stat. You can see it on the status screen of every unit. And every time that a character takes an action, they are given a little bit more fatigue, whether that be attacking or using a staff, or I think even like lockpicking or stealing for the thieves. And every action gives them a certain amount of fatigue. When their fatigue stat is above their maximum HP stat, then they will get the fatigue status, which doesn't do anything in the map that they're currently in, but the next map they will have the fatigue status and they will not be able to deploy on that map. So this is something you kind of have to keep track of. If you have a character who you really want in a map that's coming up, then you have to keep in mind, okay, so they have this much fatigue right now. How much can I use them for before they get the fatigue status? And the way you get rid of fatigue is just by having them sit out a map. So if there's like a character that you really want to use in two maps, then you might want to have them sit out the next map so that they can reset their fatigue. At some point, I think even in this episode, we're going to get an item called an S drink. You get a few of these throughout the game. There are some stores that sell them. You get them sometimes from like NPC rewards. What they do is if you have a unit with an S drink in their inventory, they will be able to be deployed even if they are fatigued. And that uses up the S drink. So that's a kind of get out of jail free card. If you mismanage someone's fatigue and you really need them for a certain map, you can have them hold an S drink and they will be able to join you. There are a finite number of those. I mean, I guess there's not technically because you can buy them from shops infinitely, but you're not going to have a lot of money for that, so you don't get a ton of them throughout the game. So you got to take advantage of them sparingly. You get enough where it's not really going to be a problem most of the time. Like you're not going to be screwed over and not be able to deploy units that you want consistently as long as you're like a little bit careful with your resource management. But it is something that you have to keep track of, which in most games you obviously don't have to. The incentive here, I think the idea here is that the game wants you to rotate out units that you use, so you're not just relying on the same units over and over again. That's pretty understandable and respectable. I can get behind it. I think the reason I generally don't like it is because the way I play Fire Emblem is just not conducive to that. Basically, the way I like to play Fire Emblem is I like to pick a core team of units that I'm going to use throughout the game. And, I'll switch in some units depending on the map. If there's a map where I have a need for an extra flyer or an extra thief, I might switch in one of those. But I generally go in with an idea of who I want to use, and I want to use them for every map. And this just doesn't let you do that unless you are willing to spare an S drink, which you might not always be able to do. So it's pretty minor though, and it's really not a big deal, especially since the game kind of incentivizes you to rotate anyway by the dismounting penalties. Like if there's an indoor map, you're probably not going to bring most of your mounted units. So all of those guys are going to have their fatigue reset anyway. So it's really not that big of a deal. I am a little bit against it on principle, but in practice, it's really not that big of an issue. And I can respect where the developers were coming from on this one. So this gets a pass for me. But yeah, this prep screen is pretty standard. You can get stuff out of the convoy. There's like an armory in case you run low on iron weapons. Weapons are fucking expensive in this game though, so you're gonna want to capture weapons most of the time if you can manage. So when you're all set and you have the units you want to use deployed, then you get a cutscene where Carrion is talking to Leif. Basically, it comes out that Hannibal knew that Leif was full of shit, and Carrion kind of like pokes fun at him here and is like, "Hey, did you really think that that was gonna like work? Did you think that Hannibal wasn't gonna figure it out? Like, he knows who you are, dude, and he's trying to help you get back onto the throne of Leonster." Carrion also decides that he's going to be sticking around with Leif rather than going back to Hannibal because he is actually from Leonster. His dad was one of the Leonster knights, so he kind of pledges loyalty to Leif and says that he's going to stick around. He also reveals that there is a group of ex-Leonster nobility that is in hiding in one of Hannibal's villas, and they are led by someone named Duke Dorius. And we don't know who this person is, but Leif seems to, because he's very excited by the name. I think he assumed that Duke Dorius was dead, and finding out that he's alive and leading a group of Leinster knights makes him very happy. So they decide that they're going to take a detour from their destination of Tara to link up with these knights and, just get some more fighting power on their side. However, as they're discussing this, they come across a village that Dagdar's bandits are attacking. We don't really understand what's going on, but Leif and co decide that they're going to fight through the enemies here to get to the bottom of this, basically. They're both very confused because Dagdar is a cool guy, so they don't know why Dagdar's bandits would be attacking. At the beginning of the map, we see a currently nameless bandit who we later learn is Gomez. He's talking with a mercenary that he's hired and basically asks him to stick around and fight off Leif and his group before leaving. And he stands on the throne. Now, this guy is a wyvern rider, and in order to access the Gaiden chapter associated with this map, you need to capture him and keep him captured for the entire map, or like before you seize, basically. He needs to be captured when Leif seizes. Now, the issue with this is that if you take too long, he will hop up on his wyvern, and you cannot capture a character who is mounted unless you use a sleep staff or the sleep sword, but you don't have access to either of those right now. So the only way to get access to AX is to fight your way through these bandits and get to the end to capture this boss before whatever turn he hops up on his wyvern, whatever turn that is. I think it's like turn 20 or 25 or something like that. You have quite a while, so it's not really something that you have to worry about. As long as you're going reasonably fast, you'll be okay. The problem is that this like it is not telegraphed to you at all, so you would have no way of knowing this unless you took too long and well, first of all, you would have no idea that you need to capture him anyway. This is kind of like it's one of the most bullshit uh Gaiden requirements in the entire series, but it's fine, I guess. It doesn't really matter. Chapter 8X is definitely like one of the most optional Gaiden chapters. Like there are some that I would say you absolutely need to go to if you want to have anything good happen to you. Like 4X you really can't skip because like you need Asvel. You can't skip 2X because you really need Lifus. 8X you get Dagdar back in, but like other than that, there's nothing there that is like super necessary to your completion of the rest of the game. So it's okay to like have it be a little bit more obscure, but at the same time, I think it's a little bit ridiculous. Like they could have at least hinted at this through some kind of conversation, but they just don't for whatever reason. I don't know. Now, among these bandits is a familiar face, Marty, as a matter of fact. And Marty is just kind of like doing his thing. He's going around, he's killing people, I guess. But you can recruit him back on your side by talking to him with either Orson or Halvin. And the recruitment conversation is quite funny because like I don't know what to tell you here, but Marty's kind of just being an asshole. Like he was doing the right thing for a while with that. He's basically just like the biggest virgin in the entire world. Not like virgin shit. No, I'm talking about like the virgin versus Chad meme. You know, he's just like the biggest loser of all time. He kind of just follows whoever's in charge. And currently Gomez is in charge and Gomez told him to go kill innocent people, so I guess Marty was just going to do it. But Orson or Halvin thankfully steps in and is like, "Hey, listen, have a little bit of backbone, have a little bit of spine because Gomez is not doing the right thing and you should join up with us to help stop him." And Marty is reluctant, but I guess just goes along with it because again, he has no backbone and kind of just does whatever anyone tells him to do. So, as much as I like Marty, like I think he's funny, I do have to say like he's kind of a fucking worm here. Um, but whatever, I guess. He's goofy. He's got a big dumb nose and weird, funny zero speed and skill. You know how it is. Oh, and the important thing here, though, is that in the recruitment conversation, he actually does explain what's going on, where Gomez has taken over control of the bandits from Dagdar and is ordering them to start pillaging villages again. So that gives us the context we need to kind of understand what's going on. Oh, I never talked about Carrion, did I? Okay, let's talk about Carrion real quick. Carrion is a cavalier. In this game, most of the mounted units we get, at least like the horseback units, are like locked to one weapon type when they're mounted. Whether it's Fergus being locked to swords, Finn is locked to lances, Brighton is locked to axes, and we haven't seen any locked to bows yet, but there are some characters that are locked to bows. Carrion has a little bit of diversity. He's able to use both lances and swords while he is on his horse, which is kind of nice. He's actually, I would say he's a pretty good unit all around. He's solid. He's got good growth rates. He's got decent bases. He has a weapon that he's about to get, which is not his personal weapon, but he can use it just as well as anyone else can. We'll talk about that in chapter 9 when he gets it. I'm actually really worried that I'm going to miss some of the events in this game because I'm double checking the script and everything, but when I played through chapter 9, I completely forgot to get this personal weapon until the end of the map, where I had already had Selfina escape. So I had to reset the whole map, and it was annoying, but it was my own fault for forgetting, I guess. Unfortunately, in this game, they don't actually give you, like in FE4, there was a nice little icon on the status screen that told you if that character had any conversations to do with anyone. So it was really easy to just check that and see if you were about to miss anything. But they got rid of that for some reason. I don't think it's in later games either, so that's a bummer. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Carrion is a good unit, I would say. Being on a horse is nice, and he can function indoors better than a lot of other characters can because he can share his sword rank both mounted and dismounted. So if you use his sword rank a lot and he levels it up, he will be able to use good swords indoors as well, unlike characters like Finn or Hicks and stuff like that. So I think he's more functional indoors than a lot of your other characters, but I would still probably leave him out because you have a lot of footlocked units who are probably just going to be better indoors anyway. Not to mention the movement and stat penalty. So he's okay. I'm not going to say he's like the best unit in the game or anything like that, but he's certainly fine. I would liken him to, one of the mid game Cavaliers, maybe like uh not Kyle or Ford because they both suck ass. Maybe like Kieran, I guess. Yeah, he's a Cavalier. And he can do combat pretty well. I don't think this is the problem, right? Because I'm tempted to compare characters to other characters throughout the series, but really there's no one like Carrion because mounted units in this game and combat units have such a weird dynamic with the rest of the cast. So comparing him to someone like Kieran is not going to do him justice because he's not as good as Kieran. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but he's definitely worth using. I'm going to say that much. He's fine. He's pretty good. Now, as a character, we already talked a little bit about him. He just seems like a pretty loyal Leonster knight. He's like Finn Jr., basically, although I do like some of the interactions he has with Finn at the beginning of this, where, he's just like, did you really think that you were going to pull one over on Hannibal? Like, he obviously knows who you are. Stop trying to fool yourself. So, I don't, like, he's not that harsh about it. Like, he's nice about it, but still, I just thought it was funny. Um, Leif really thought that he had something going with Hannibal, but nope. Carrion just smashes all of those dreams into pieces. Getting through this map is pretty easy. The only thing that's actually kind of tricky is that a lot of the bandits have, in fact, I think all of the bandits have poison weapons. And if they hit you even once, you will be poisoned for the entire rest of the map. So that's where the antitoxin from last map comes in handy. Or you can just keep them poisoned and have Safi and Nana grind their staff rank, whatever you prefer. Oh, and I should mention, I probably should have talked about this at the prep screen, but better late than never, I guess. You absolutely want to leave Asvel behind in this map. It is like imperative that you leave Asvel behind, even if he's not fatigued. He probably will be, because you probably used him a lot in Manster. But if he is not fatigued, you need to leave him behind, because if he gets fatigued in this map and is not available for the next map, you are dicked. Like you need Asvel to be around for the next map. So just keep that in mind. So you get to the end of the map, you can capture the boss pretty easily with like Finn or Fergus using the Brave Sword. So capturing him is pretty simple, and then once you've cleared out all the enemies, visited all the houses and whatever, you can seize, and you get the cutscene where you figure out what's going on a little bit. Leif tells the boss that if he gives Leif the information that he wants, then Leif will just let him go. So the boss complies and tells them a little bit about what's going on with Gomez. He reveals that Gomez has sprung a trap for Dagdar and his daughter Tanya inside the mansion and is planning on killing them. So Leif is going to have to hurry up if he wants to save them. And with that, he just lets the boss go as he promised, and he's on his way. And I believe that's it. I hope I didn't miss anything. Yeah, it seems like that's everything. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. This map is okay. I'm not going to say it's like the best or anything, but it's probably my favorite of the group that we played today. It's a little simple, it's a little boring, but it has a nice anti-turtling incentive, I suppose, even if you couldn't know about it beforehand. And it's a damn sight better than the next map we're about to play, I'll tell you that much. So yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's nothing to write home about, but it's definitely not a bad map by any stretch of the imagination. Moving on to chapter 8X, which is called Dagdar's Mansion. After finding out about the plan of Gomez to kill Dagdar and Tanya, Leif decides to head into the mansion to help rescue them, and that's pretty much it. Uh, we can see from this is actually our first time in a prep screen with a fog of war map, because this is a fog of war map, and it's really funny because you don't even get to see what the map looks like. Like even in your starting position, you have no idea what you're about to get yourself into. So I don't know. I just thought that that was really funny. It's a great image of just like the preps menu over a black screen of nothing. As I mentioned earlier, you're definitely going to want to deploy Asvel, as well as some thieves, because there are some chests and stuff. Again, this is kind of why I don't like Fog of War, especially Thracian Fog of War, because you would have no way of knowing that there are chests in this map if you didn't already know about it beforehand. So if you didn't deploy a thief, or worse, if both of your thieves were fatigued for some reason, or maybe one of them is dead, then what the fuck are you gonna do? Like I guess that would be true even if you could see the map right. But my point is I just wish you could see the chests on the overview so that you could know to bring a thief instead of having to reset once you realize that there are chests. Although I think they do give you some door and chest keys. I don't know if it's enough for all of them though. The premise of this map is very straightforward. Once you start it, you will see that uh, Dagdar and Tanya have been chased into this room in the center of the map and are being pursued by a large group of enemies. Gomez confronts Dagdar, and they basically have some banter about how Dagdar essentially just kind of bowed to Avel. As soon as Avel showed up, he kind of just let her walk all over him from Gomez's perspective. And now the bandit group is in such a rough state that they're all starving. And Gomez decided that he was going to take matters into his own hands and staged a coup to kill Dagdar and go back to being bandits that pillaged and raided. And Dagdar decides to fight back. So the beginning of the map, you have to basically just move your units around. You can go either left and up or right and up. Both sides have about like the same level of enemies, I believe. But the real situation is going on in the middle of the map with Dagdar and Tanya. There are a lot of enemies. I believe Tanya is actually hard coded to live through the first couple of turns, but that's not going to last forever. My Tanya was actually quite dodgy because I used her a fair bit and she leveled up speed a whole bunch, so she was okay. But if you haven't been using Tanya, then she's kind of in a rough spot and you really have to rely on Dagdar to get you through this section. Dagdar is fortunately pretty tough, but he is not very fast, so he's going to get hit by a lot of things. And as bulky as he is, eventually he is going to go down. So you do have to get in there quickly if you want to save him. You can heal. I like you can get some like there are things that you can do to mitigate this. If you give Dagdar a vulnerary for one thing, or if you have a physics staff that you can use on like Safi or something. But it is possible to just get unlucky and have Dagdar or Tanya just fucking die. So that kind of sucks, but not really a whole lot you can do about it. Once you get Dagdar out of that situation, whether it's by having Dagdar kill all the enemies or rescuing him with Leif and his group, it's pretty straightforward. The gimmick of this map is that there are enemies that you can't see with ranged weapons that are going to attack you through walls, whether they be archers or hand axe bandits or stuff like that. You're going to get a lot of pot shots taken at you. You are going to want to bring someone with ranged attacks that can fight back, someone like Asvel, or I mean, you'll always have Leif, and Leif can use the light brand. You can have Orson with his Pooji. I actually brought Orson and he died this map, and I didn't want to reset because I got a level up for movement on Shiva, so I decided to let him Orson die just because I wanted to use Shiva long term. Oh yeah, I'm planning on using Shiva long term. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I am. And so Orson is dead, unfortunately. So I didn't get to see the conversation with him and Tanya. which we'll talk about in just a moment. But either way, eventually you're going to clear out all the enemies. I don't like this map. It's very annoying. Just the fact that there are so many enemies in the dark that you can't even see coming, and you don't know how many enemies you're going to be exposed to on enemy phase. So you kind of just have to like hope that you dodge a whole bunch or that you happen to be out of range of a few units. It's not a great situation to be in, and generally you're gonna hear me say this a lot, and I've said it a couple times already. Fog of War sucks ass and should not be in this game. So any map that has it is going to be close to the bottom of my list of maps that we played that episode, if not at the very bottom. But for what it's worth, this map is pretty straightforward. Like I said, you just kill all the enemies in the middle with Dagdar. He might need some help, but eventually you will get him out of there. There are some chests and stuff that you can go around and get, but they're not that difficult because there's usually only a couple of enemies guarding them. And once you clear out all the treasure and all the enemies, the only thing you're left with is Gomez, the boss. And this is probably the most infamous boss in Fire Emblem history, at least in Thracia. I'm not saying he is the worst boss. I'm saying that he's probably the most well known for being a shitty boss because first of all, he's like jacked. He's got really high speed, really high defense, and really high strength. So he's going to be hitting like a truck, and you're not going to be able to do a whole lot of damage. You can't even double him with most of your units. The only character who's going to reliably have enough speed to double him is Asvel, and Asvel cannot double him because his lightest tome still weighs him down by however much, there's just, it's always going to weigh him down because there's no way to mitigate weight in this game for tomes. So he's never going to have 20 speed in actuality. And since Gomez has, I believe, 17, he's always going to not get doubled by Asvel. He might even double some of your units if you're not careful. He's on a throne, which not only increases his avoid, but also his defense by, I believe, 10. I believe thrones boost your defense by 10 in this game, which is absolutely ridiculous. So, your best option for getting rid of units on thrones and bosses on thrones and gates is to use magic. In the first few chapters, it wasn't really an issue because I killed all the bosses with Avel's flame sword, but now we don't have the flame sword, so our alternative is to use Asvel. And Asvel is absolutely necessary for beating this boss. I actually don't even know how you would go about fighting Gomez without Asvel. He's that necessary to making this boss consistently killable. But as long as you have Asvel and you rescue him out of range so he doesn't get hit by Gomez's steel bow, he should be fine. You can just keep taking shots at him with Graph Caliber until you crit or whatever, and then he's gone. And that's pretty much the end of the map. There's a conversation between Orson and Tanya. They kind of have like a love interest thing going on. It's just a funny conversation, He like I think it's cute that the only way Orson knows how to express himself is by being an asshole. Like he doesn't actually know how to engage with a human being in like a gentle and compassionate way. So the only way that he can express his concern over Tanya's safety is by calling her a moron. And Tanya, of course, is puts up a fight about that and is just kind of an asshole back to him. But it's funny, They have a fun dynamic. Leif and Dagdar have a conversation where it's interesting. Like every character up to this point, when they find out about what happened to Avel, has been really understanding. I mean, they've been sad and really upset by it. But even August, who is like extremely blunt, extremely callous and cold, when he heard about what happened to Avel, he was pretty gentle with Leif, I would say. He definitely used it as like motivation for him to become stronger and to motivate himself to fight against the Empire, but he did not blame Leif. He did not get angry at Leif. He just told Leif, like, listen, you can't save her, but what you can do is use this as an opportunity to fuel your passion for fighting the Empire. When Dagdar finds out about what happens to Avel, he gets pissed. He like yells at Leif. And it doesn't last very long because Leif is like, you're right, I was, weak, I couldn't save her. And then as soon as he starts doing that, Dagdar kind of comes around and realizes, hey, I was a little bit harsh with you. But the fact that his initial reaction is anger and disappointment with Leif is, I think that lords in this game, or rather in this series, do not get blame pointed at them very often. It's something that Corrin gets made fun of a lot for in Fates, where he gets mountains of praise heaped on him, and then every bad decision he makes is actually like fine because he's a god and everyone loves him for no reason. I think that to a lesser extent that happens in a lot of games in this series. Not to say that it's not a really big problem in Fates and probably bigger than in most games, but when is there a time you can think of where the Lord makes a mistake or is unable to accomplish something and is actually like held accountable for that? It's not very often, and it happens a lot in this game, which is why I like the narrative of FE5 so much and why Leaf is one of my favorite lords. But it's a pretty uncommon occurrence in this series. Like, even thinking about other Kaga games, when did Marth ever do something wrong that was, called out by his companions and his advisors and things like that as being a mistake or being, the wrong call? And Dagdar certainly does not let Leaf off of the hook here. He's angry and he wants Leaf to know it. And then once Leaf starts to show that, like, yes, he understands that he fucked up and that he wishes that he could have been stronger to save Avel, he backs off a little bit and realizes that he is not being fair to Leaf. But that initial response is quite interesting, and I liked seeing that reaction because it's a little bit uncommon compared to what you would see in a typical Fire Emblem game, or even what we've seen up to this point, right? Because Finn was pretty nice about it to Leaf, and pretty much everyone else has been as well. Okay, so the end of this map is one of my favorite moments in the story, so probably my single favorite moment in the story up to this point, because Leaf he posts cringe, right? He has a conversation with August about the situation and goes like full Ben Shapiro, like, why could they not simply work for their food? He's kind of putting all the blame on Dagdar and his or Dagdar's bandits and Gomez and saying why couldn't they just earn their food through honest labor? And August is like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? They live in the middle of nowhere. The soil here is not fertile enough for them to farm, and they would have died if they hadn't stolen to survive. And then Leaf tries to, because August mentions that a lot of them were abandoned by their families, and so Leaf then tries to shift the blame onto the family and says, why did they forsake their children? And August calls him out on that because despite the fact that Leif has been on the run his entire life, he's never wanted for food. We find out later that Finn starved himself to make sure that Leif had enough to eat. And because of that, Leif never had to deal with being hungry. Really, I mean, like, I'm sure he was hungry, but not like, he never starved in the same way that these bandits have been. And Leaf never even stopped to think about that. Leaf never even considered, like, I've been on the run this whole time. Why did I have enough to eat when realistically I wouldn't have in those kinds of circumstances, I wouldn't typically have enough to eat. And August is like, did you never stop to think about where that food came from? And Leaf says, no, I didn't. August really hammers home the point that this land is just not able to be farmed. There's no food that the mountain, craggy, rocky wasteland of Thracia is able to provide. And Leaf still doesn't want to quite give up the ghost because he then starts to say, well, why couldn't they just import their food? He's really trying to like find any excuse to not like accept the reality that like this is just sometimes you need to do the wrong thing in order to survive. And August kind of drops the bombshell here that the entire North Thracia or Manster district as it's known these days has basically a rule and a law saying that they cannot trade with Southern Thracia. And Leif did not know about this. Leif is completely unaware that the North outright bans trade with the South. And August explains that it's because there was a war, yada yada. You know, there's an old, deep animosity there between the North and the South, so much so that despite the fact that the North is thriving, they have so many resources, more than they could ever know what to do with, they can't import it to Southern Thracia because of that old animosity. And this really gives Leif a new perspective on the whole situation with Thracia because he's been taught his entire life that Thracia is, they're warmongers. All they know how to do is fight. All they can do is kill people and they're hostile and all that. But Leif is suddenly now realizing that the reason that um they have to be that way is because if they didn't, they would just all die. And this is something that comes up in FE4 as well, very briefly in, I believe, chapter 8, where Travant talks about how if Thracia did not have the export of mercenaries, then there would be no income for the country and everyone would just starve. And you got to think like, yeah, some people can become mercenaries, but not everyone can become a mercenary. Some people aren't skilled enough to become mercenaries. Some people don't have the training or the equipment to be a mercenary. What are they supposed to do? The answer is that they become bandits and steal to survive. There's really no way to make an honest living in Thracia without being some kind of violent murderer, because if you try to be like a farmer, then you just starve because there's no way to grow food in southern Thracia. And August, just for good measure, decides to take a dig at Leif's family by saying that North Thracia has been plagued by selfish and short-sighted rulers. And I mean, that's not, that is Leif's grandfather and it was going to be his dad before his dad died. So August is really just taking a stab at Leif's entire family here and is saying like, yeah, they all sucked and you need to learn from their mistakes. He also talks, he doesn't go into detail, but he also says that Quan, you need to not repeat your father's mistakes. And he doesn't talk about what mistakes he's talking about there, but we can infer just based on what we know about Quan. Quan really wanted to. He talked about wanting to reunify Thracia, and I actually took some issue with that because the way it was portrayed in the game was that Quan was like this savior who wanted uh, conquer the belligerent country of Thracia that really it needed to be conquered for its own good, right? That was how it was portrayed. Like Quan was doing the right thing by wanting to fight Thracia to the point of them like him being able to reunify the country. I say reunify in quotes because he basically just wanted to take it over and have it be like part of the Manster district. I think that was the implication, right? Because he hated Thracia, he hated the rulers there, he hated Trevant, and he didn't want anything to do with them. So it's not like he was going to do it diplomatically. He wanted to fight and beat them and take over Thracia by force. At least it seemed like it. And at the end of FE4, Leif, it says that Leif fulfills his father's goal of reunifying Thracia. So the implication that that game gives is that Quan was right all along. But in this game, they're really taking a step back and analyzing that perspective and saying, like, well, no, Quan kind of had the right idea because reunification is the right thing to do so that both countries can thrive and benefit from each other's resources. Because one thing we find out next chapter, one thing that Southern Thracia does have is minerals. It has, like, I assume, precious metals and gems. So that could be a great benefit for Northern Thracia, whereas Northern Thracia has a lot of food. So they're really able to benefit from each other, like coexisting in harmony. And August says basically, your dad had the right idea of, well, he doesn't say this, but like Leif echoes the idea of wanting to reunify the country, but August says you just can't do it the same way your father tried to, through force. And I mean, that's the implication that I get from it. but he's not really explicit about what he means by Quan's mistakes. So he could be talking about something else, but I don't really see what else it would be. So generally, the idea here, I think, is that Leif is really like taking to heart that yes, Thracia is like a lot of Thracians are hostile and war hungry and want to fight all the time, but it's because they're left with no other choice. And he's really starting to gain perspective on like, okay, maybe they're not all bad monsters after all, and maybe I'm the one who needs to like invoke change in order to make this relationship work. I don't remember what happens at the end of FE4 if he's like the king of the new Thracia or whatever. Because if so, that seems a little bit wrong-headed, but at least they're starting to plant the seeds of the right idea here, which is cool. And I love the scene. It's absolutely excellent, and I think it's the best part of this game so far in terms of the story because it really casts Quan, who was previously just kind of like the objective good guy in the whole Thracia Leonster situation, as being a bad ruler and having wrong ideas about the best way to govern Leinster. And Leif needs to learn to not repeat those mistakes. And that's great. That's really cool. So with Dagdar and Tanya rescued, the group adds them to their ranks and starts moving towards their destination, which is no longer Tara. If you remember, at the beginning of at the beginning of chapter 8, Carrion revealed that there was a mountain villa owned by Hannibal, where some of the Leinster nobility from before the fall of Leinster were holed up and in hiding. And Leif decided to meet up with them. So that's where they're headed now. So we can go ahead and move into the next chapter, which is called The Emblem of Norun. So Leif has made it to the general vicinity of Hannibal's villa. Unfortunately, however, Thracia has caught wind of there being a presence here. We see Trevant, which is actually the first time we're seeing Trevant in this game. It's really cool to see him. If you remember, he's actually my favorite villain in the series, so I'm really excited for him to be here, even though he doesn't really do a whole lot in this game. He's talking with a follower of his named Murloc, and Altana is also there. They all seem to be under the impression that this is a group of bandits, and it's actually left ambiguous, like, what exactly is going on here? Why do they, first of all, how did they even find out that they were here? Do these people actually think that they're bandits? Maybe Altana and Murloc do, but Trevant does not. The way Trevant is talking, it seems like he was told that they were bandits by someone else. I don't know who that would be. Maybe the Empire tipped him off. I have no idea. That would actually make a lot of sense, actually, because the Empire can't fight in Thracian territory for fear of starting a war, but if they gave a tip that they were bandits, then Trevant would go take care of it himself, and that would be like an internal matter, so the Empire wouldn't have to deal with the consequences. That would make sense. Unless it's given an answer later, that's probably how I'm going to choose to interpret it. Otherwise, it's possible that it was just like incorrect information, because Trevant genuinely seems to think that they're bandits, although he could just be lying. I don't know. Trevant talks a little bit about how he also wants to reunify Thracia, and this is great. It kind of echoes what we talked about at the end of last chapter, which, by the way, I should also mention the reason that I don't think Chapter 8X should be skippable is because that whole bit with Leif really gaining perspective on the perspective of Thracia is completely absent if you skip Chapter 8X. So, bummer. But Trevant here talks about how he also thinks that a unified Thracia is what is best for everyone, and generally, I think that he falls into the Quan category of wanting to conquer Leinster through force rather than actually, trying to do it diplomatically. He seems to come to terms with the fact that he's done a lot of terrible things and accepts that, like, even if it's going to damn him, to use his words, even if it damns me to the deepest pit of hell, he wants to reunify Thracia. That's all that he cares about. So you can kind of see that this sentiment is still alive and well in the Thracian nobility. but they are also, just like Juan, and presumably his father before him, going about it in the wrong way. So Leif has to figure out a way to do it in a way that satisfies everyone rather than just one side conquering the other. Truvant and Altena decide to leave and let Murloc handle this on his own. We then switch to the inside of the villa, where we encounter a few new faces. The first of which is Selfina, and she's talking to her father, Dorius. I had actually completely forgotten that Dorius was Selfina's dad, but that's not really important. So Selfina talks to Dorius and says, "Hey, there are some Thracians outside about to attack us," and Dorius is very frustrated because someone named Glade is not here. Apparently, they have someone named Glade on their side, but he is in Tara, currently trying to defend Tara with the others. So he is not there, and without him, they are not. They do not have anyone who is actually experienced in battle. Selfina offers to distract them while the others are able to escape, but Dorius tells her that Leif is on his way with a group of soldiers to help him out, and so she decides that she's going to set up a defensive perimeter with a few of her followers. We'll talk about all of them in a second, but then we switch to Leif. Leif realizes that Thracia is attacking the villa and is confused because the villa is supposed to be under Hannibal's protection. August kind of implies that he doesn't trust Hannibal and thinks that he may have tipped Thracia off. But I mean, I don't think it's ever confirmed. But we know that this isn't true just because Hannibal is like a good guy and he wouldn't do something like that. And Leif has the same opinion. So we're still left to wonder what exactly happened here. It's never made clear, but whatever. But they put that aside for a minute and just talk about how they need to go and rescue them quickly. So the idea of this map is it is an escape map, but also kind of a defend map. You need to escape with Leaf and all the other characters, but also if the villa is captured by an enemy, like if you leave the escape tile exposed and someone manages to get onto it, then the map will end automatically. So it's kind of a hybrid of both. It's interesting. There are two ways that you can go about doing this map, and I actually think that it's pretty interesting. You can take the shorter path, which uh, takes you across basically, it's shaped like a big triangle. Leaf is on the top right part of the triangle, and the area that you need to escape from and defend is on the top left part of the triangle. The connecting part, like the one that, like the straight line from Leaf to Selfina, is much shorter, but it's also covered in trees and mountains and limits mobility a lot. The southern path goes down and then back up, but it's a lot more open and the maneuverability is way better. So it's kind of like, do you want to take the shorter path but have less mobility, or take the longer path but have more flexibility in how you're actually able to engage enemies, which is a great concept and I love it. So I usually, or well, not usually, but this playthrough, I sent Asvel by himself through the shorter path so that he can go and get through there quickly. Whereas the mounted units, I deployed a bunch of mounted units this chapter and sent a lot of them down to go the long way around. The biggest issue with this map, not like issue in terms of it's bad, but like the thing that you're going to have to worry about the most is that there are a group of wyvern riders led by the mini boss Murloc, or I guess it's not even the mini boss, he's just the boss, Murloc. All of these guys have killer lances, which is scary because, obviously you don't want to get crit. You can put scrolls on your characters and they can't get crit. So that's the best way to deal with these guys. But even without the chance of getting crit, they're pretty strong. They hit hard. They might even be able to double some of your slower units. So you got to be careful. Murloc is pretty tough, although I was able to take him down with Finn pretty easily. Finn and Fergus, I think, had to team up on him, and they're two of my best units. So Asvel is better against the Wyverns, but he's also like my best unit, so I wanted to have him defend the others from a horde of soldiers and armor knights and stuff like that. I think there's some archers too. I figured he was best off doing that. Speaking of the defenders, let's talk about them because there are four new units that we have to talk about here. We'll start with Selfina. Selfina as a character is, I mean, she's Duke Dorius's daughter, and we know that she's like Duke Dorius is like an important part of Leinster nobility, so she's loyal to Leif, and she has a lot of investment in seeing Leinster rebuilt. So that's pretty much all we know about her. She's brave. I mean, she was willing to like basically sacrifice herself to make sure that the others could escape, and the only reason that she didn't is because she didn't have to, because Leif was on her way to save her or save the entire group. So she was willing to take the fat L there for sure, which is cool. You know, it's she's got spirit. I'll give her that much. As a unit, she's okay. She's a bow knight, which is the first one that we're seeing, and she like bows suck. They're the worst type of weapon in the game, but there are definitely uses for it. There are plenty of wyverns and pegasi that you fight in this game, and lots of places where you fight in like enclosed spaces where you can shoot across walls. That's pretty cool. Bow Knights actually share their weapon type indoors. They don't use swords indoors, they use bows. So they're basically just archers inside. And archers kind of suck, but at least outside she has a mount and she can do stuff with that. She also gets a brave bow. I mean, again, anyone can use the brave bow, but unlike the brave axe or the brave sword, there aren't a whole lot of characters who want it because the only other options for bow users are like Ronan and Tanya and Robert, who we're about to talk about, and all of them suck ass. So she's pretty much got dibs on the brave bow, at least until you get Xavier, and you might not get Xavier. So it's entirely reasonable for her to be the sole user of the Brave Bow, and if that's the case, then she's pretty good. I would say at least on player phase, but she leaves a lot to be desired. I'll say that much. She's not one of the best characters in the game, but she's okay for sure. She's definitely the best unit that we get in this map because next let's talk about Robert. Robert is just everything that Selfina is except way way worse. His bases suck ass. He has no good like his I think his weapon rank is E. Like Jesus Christ, dude, come on. He's so bad. I would say he's maybe the worst unit in the game. At least he can rescue and he can like he can't capture because he can't capture with bows, but he can rescue um and transfer around units and stuff like that. So I guess he has that going for them. Probably better than Tanya, I guess, or Ronan, but still quite bad. If I like honestly, I think that the extra maps of availability might put Tanya and Ronan over him, but it's pretty close. All three of them are just kind of fighting for the worst unit in the game prize, I guess. This also applies to the next two characters we're about to talk about. I have absolutely no idea what his character is like. He's the only thing we get out of him is his escape quote and his death quote. Both of them are extremely generic, but yeah. So he's a bad unit. He's not absolutely nothing as a character. But he can be fun. He can be fun to use. Just like any shitter can be fun to use. It's training a unit who's bad can always be an enjoyable experience. So he might be worth it if you're into that sort of thing. But if you are looking to like actually use unironically good units, then you should never ever 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 field Robert because he's terrible. The next two are I'm just going to talk about them together because they're very similar. Kane and Alba, they are both Lance Knights, which is the class that Finn is. So they really don't have much of a leg to stand on here. I really wish one of them was a Cavalier like Carrion. Then maybe you could get some use out of them. At least they would have a niche, right? But unfortunately, no. They both have to directly compete with the one of the best characters in the game in Finn. Now, I have mentioned in the past that just because one character is worse than another doesn't mean you can't just use both or neither, right? Like there's no reason to just only use one unit on a team of a class. If there are two Lance Knights and they're both really good, then you can just use both of them. Unfortunately, Kane and Alba are in a very similar position to Robert in that they suck. Their base stats are terrible, although they aren't as bad as Robert's, and their growth rates are okay, but nothing to write home about. I think if these guys all had like exceptional growth rates, like they had like esque level growth rates, then I mean they would still be bad, but they would be like a lot of fun to use, and I could definitely see someone wanting to deploy them and feed them kills and stuff. But they just have normal unit growth rates, so I don't really see what they were going for here. Uh, there are some instances of this in the Arcanea games where you'll get units that are just basically worthless, like Tomas or Cord or Caesar, who are just worse versions of characters you already have. In those games, I kind of get it because it seems like they're meant to be Iron Man. Whereas Thracia, I don't think you're supposed to Iron Man it. It doesn't seem very conducive to being Iron Man. I mean, you can do it obviously, but it's not like Arcanea where you can tell that they like planned around it. It feels like they were just like they're filler characters, right? So I don't know. They can be fun to use. I've used all of them at some point. I think I used Alba my very first time that I played through the game. Uh, and Kane and Robert I used for like half a playthrough at some point. That was the same playthrough where I had that incredibly strong Dawson, but I didn't finish that run, so I guess I didn't really use them that much. I think this map is pretty interesting because there is actually an incentive to hurry up because these guys suck so much, and you can't really expect them to fend off an entire group of enemies by themselves, especially if one of the wyverns manages to get to them, because they don't even have a scroll that they can use to make sure that they don't get crit. So you're definitely going to want to hurry up and get to them quickly, but the short route doesn't like it's really it takes you a while, especially if you're trying to go over it with mounted units, because there are forests and mountains, and you're just never going to get through it if you try to force your entire army to go that way. So you kind of have to make the choice of like, okay, who do I want to head over this way? And not to mention, like if you go through the shorter path, you're going to have absolutely no mobility when it comes to dealing with the wyverns, and you're just going to get murked by whatever wyvern happens to show up first. So there's some flexibility you can have in how you deal with this, and making the choice to like split up your army is always interesting. Or I guess you could send your entire army down the long way and hope that the scrub squad holds out long enough to make that a viable option. Either way works, and I think that the option is welcome. Well, either way, eventually you will clear out the wyverns and the other enemies, and you will link up Selfina with Leif and Finn, and there are some conversations you can have. Leif and Selfina conversation is actually interesting because the conversation itself isn't anything to write home about, like the interaction between Selfina and Leif. It just talks a little bit about how they have a shared backstory and how Leif sees her as being like like a family member to him because he never really got to know his real family that well. But what is interesting about this is that Leaf confirms that it gives a little bit of context to the relationship with Lachesis. I guess Lachesis was like a mother to Leaf as well, because I guess it makes sense because we knew that she was in Leonster for a while. Like she brought Nana there, and that's why Nana was raised as Finn's daughter. But I guess it never really clicked for me that Lachesis was like there for an extended period of time. I always kind of imagined it as like she left Nana there and then immediately went to go to Isaac and then died on the way. But apparently she like lived there for a while and was pretty close with Finn, or well, yeah, probably Finn too, if you know what I'm saying. But also Leaf, and Leaf kind of saw her as like a mother figure in the same way that he sees Ava. Man, he's it's like the what's the fucking Dr. Seuss book? Are you my mommy? That's kind of Leaf, isn't it? He never really had a mother figure of his own, and he kind of just like Selfina and Lachesis and Avel, all these guys are just kind of like filling that role for him. So that's kind of sad. I feel bad for Leaf. Damn. But I don't know. I like this little bit of extra Lachesis lore that we get. Gives some more context into Nana and Finn's relationship as well. And then Selfina and Finn have a little conversation. Uh, Pretty much not interesting at all. Although if she had already talked to Leaf, then you get some more context on the relationship between Finn and Lachesis, where Selfina basically implies that they might have been an item. More fuel for the shipping war that is Beowulf and Lachesis versus Finn and Lachesis. But I've already talked about that, so another time. And then the final conversation is between Carrion and Selfina. This is actually a really nice conversation. Selfina gives him a special weapon that was apparently used by his father, and then passed to his mother, who then gave it to Selfina for safekeeping. And as basically, Selfina was instructed to give him this weapon when he became a true knight or a worthy knight. And Selfina decides that it is time for that moment to come. So she gives him the Paragon sword, which is I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a sword that doubles your experience whenever you use it. And I believe it stacks with Paragon mode. It doesn't stack with like actual Paragon, I don't think. Like if you use a skill manual, but I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe it does, but I'm pretty sure it just gives you the skill Paragon, and like when you use it, and if you already have Paragon, then it's not going to do anything for you. But Paragon mode does stack with the Paragon skill, so I'm pretty sure that interaction still works out. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, this is not an exclusive weapon for Carrion. He can pass it around, anyone can use it, and that's pretty nice because getting more experience on your units is really cool. But Carrion would have liked a niche, and there's really no reason to use him other than just liking him, because you could just give the Paragon Sword to someone else. But I mean, I've already talked about Carrion. I do think he's a pretty good unit, even without the exclusive access to the Paragon Sword. But I don't know. He would I think he would have been cool with that niche. I wish that more characters actually had their personal weapons, like implied by the story to be personal weapons, locked to them so other people couldn't just steal them and use them anyway. I think Selfina, Carrion, and Halvin would have way more of a niche there if that was the case. So overall, I like this map. I did actually talking about it made me remember liking it more than I thought going into recording this because I played them a while ago. So I do actually like this map quite a bit. I love the option of I like the choice that you're forced to make. And unlike in Chapter 7, where there's no incentive to take one path over the other, in this instance, there are advantages and disadvantages to going both ways. And you can kind of make your own decision on where you want to end up. Unfortunately, the back half of this map is a little boring because most of the enemies are going to be dead by the time that you deal with the wyverns, but it's fine. Like, if you take a really long time and Murloc is still alive, then some reinforcements show up. So I guess that's something, but it is what it is. It's not the most amazing map in the world or anything, but it's still pretty fun, and I enjoyed my time with it. After beating the map, Leif links up with Duke Dorius, and it's a really touching moment. I mean, I have no context for who this person is, so I'm not really, I'm not moved by it myself, but you can tell that there's a lot of emotion here. Dorius actually starts crying because he's so moved by seeing Leif again. We find out that Dorius has actually lost his arm uh, in service of helping Leif escape from Leonster all those years ago. And Dorius is kind of dismissive of it and says that, even if I still had it, I wouldn't be much use for you anyway. Dorius then says that they should go out and deal with the rest of the Thracian soldiers, but August chimes in and says that they seem to have stopped attacking. When Dorius goes out to investigate, it turns out that Altena has received word that these are not bandits at all, but instead are a group of mercenaries stationed there to protect the area from bandits. So, she kind of explains the mix up and it calls off the attack. I can only assume that Hannibal contacted her and told her this because he's the only person who would have had reason to do so, and especially to lie about it. So that's kind of like our soft confirmation that Hannibal was not the person to make this tip happen and to have Trevant attack this group. But I don't know. I mean, it's entirely possible that it was just a genuine mix up and Trevant really thought he was going after bandits. But I don't know. It definitely seems like there's some foul play going on here because otherwise there's really no reason they would have attacked. I have no idea. Maybe it's explained at some point in the future. And that is the end of the chapter and the last chapter that we played this episode. So let's talk about the map gauntlet here because I think it's an interesting one. I don't think any of the maps here are great. Um, I think chapter nine's pretty good, and that's definitely the winner. I know I said chapter eight might be, but I think chapter nine is a lot more interesting just talking about it because of the options that you have in how do you approach it, and the wyverns being like actual dangerous units that you have to maneuver around. Whereas, like honestly, up to this point, there haven't really been any threatening enemies. It's pretty much all just been like fodder that you can get rid of in 2 seconds. So I mean, like, except Galzus, obviously, but he's not meant to be fought anyway. You do actually have to fight the Thracian Draco Knights. So I don't know what it is with the last chapter that we play every episode being the best one, but I don't know. I guess this is kind of how it's worked out. So chapter 3 versus chapter 9 is really interesting because again, I do think that they're both good, but they excel in different things. Chapter 3 is very much a side objective oriented anti like you have to hurry up and you're encouraged to go out of your way to play the map in a way that is efficient and that gets you the best rewards. And that's always interesting. But it's also all optional. So you can skip over that stuff if you want to, and you have to make the choice to do it on your own, which is, it's cool, that it gives you options. Chapter 9, you pretty much always have to do everything, but it does allow you to kind of pick your route on how you want to approach it, whether you go for that shorter route that gives you less mobility, or the longer route that allows you to have better flexibility in dealing with the wyverns. So I don't know. It's kind of night and day. It's hard to compare them. In terms of like which map I have more fun playing, I might have to give it to chapter 9 because chapter this is something I forgot to mention earlier actually, and I do still think that chapter 3 is better than chapter 6. But one thing that chapter 6 has going for it is it has a much nicer pace to it. Chapter 3, there's a lot of backtracking, there's a lot of running around, and in chapter 6 you really don't have to worry about that. It's you're encouraged to like keep pushing forward as opposed to chapter 3 where you have to like set up rescue chains and have certain characters go back and forth, and that can be a little tedious for sure. um, I think that this map offers a much better progression pace. you know you're it's a little bit boring towards the end, but it's not even for that long because you have stuff going on in like multiple areas. In chapter 3, by the time you get have to deal with the bandit reinforcements that are going to destroy the houses, you're probably mostly done with the castle anyway, or at least like close to it. So yeah, I don't know. It's hard. I think I'm going to give it to chapter 9 actually. Despite saying that I don't think that any of these maps are excellent, I think that the more I talk about chapter 9, the more I think it's a pretty good map. It's not excellent. It's definitely not the best that this game gets. We're going to see that the mid game is pretty strong as well. I think that this is a genuinely pretty fun map, and like it's hard. Like if you ask me on a different day, maybe I would say Chapter 3 beats it, or maybe I would say Chapter 6 beats both of them. But I do think that Chapter 9 takes it for me just by a little bit. It's close, but I do think it wins out for me in the end. Next episode, we're tackling only 3 chapters. Next episode, we're going to be doing 3 chapters for a while. So that's Chapter 10, 11, and 11X. So it's going to be interesting seeing how those maps go. I don't remember really liking any of those maps, so I could be wrong though. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be like topping any of these for me. There is absolutely no news in regards to any of the stuff on Serenus Forest that isn't Heroes related, so we're going to skip over news for this time. And honestly, there's not a whole lot that I've been doing that I have a strong desire to talk about. I've actually been playing more Fire Emblem. I've been doing some drafts with some of my friends. I did an FE8 draft, which is fun, which was fun. I beat that. And then I also did an FE11 draft, which I'm in the middle of currently. I'm probably going to finish that tonight or not finish it, but continue playing it tonight after I finish recording this. There is actually something that I am excited to share with you guys. It's not Fire Emblem related, but it is like another pet project that I've been working on, parallel to this podcast. It has to do with Pokemon. I'm a big Pokemon fan. I've talked a little bit about it, but I really enjoy Pokemon. I've been getting into doing some Nuzlocks, and I've been having a lot of fun with that. There is one game that I've always kind of had mixed feelings about, though, and that's Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I love them in a lot of ways. I think aesthetically they're amazing. and they have a lot of great quality of life features that make them enjoyable to go back to over some of the older or even some of the newer games. Um, there's a lot of like little details that make them really cute and really charming and have a lot of soul. Not to mention they have a shitload of content, so I like them in that regard. The problem is that I never actually really enjoy my time playing them because they have so many issues in terms of their core design. It's a really interesting problem that I feel is really unique. Most games have like the issue, not most games, but a lot of bad games have the issue of like their core design is like solid, but the details kind of make it worse. Maybe they don't have a great uh, gameplay hook, or maybe if it's, in the case of Fire Emblem, maybe like some of the maps are bad, even if the core mechanics are good. For Gen 4 Johto, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it's kind of the opposite, where I think the core design is terrible. And Johto is not a fun region to play through, but it's like Heart Gold and Soul Silver is like the definition of a polished turd, because they are really, really good at sprucing up those games. They spruced up those games a lot, and they made them really enjoyable in a lot of ways. It's hard to get past those core issues, being the level curve being bad, and also the restriction on using a lot of Johto Pokemon. A lot of Johto Pokemon you don't get access to until the very end of the game, or even going into Kanto. There are some Pokemon like Houndour, Murkrow, Slugma, Weavile, Larvitar that are not accessible to you at all until post Lance, which is not fun. And I like having a variety of options instead of just using the same Pokemon over and over again. So what I decided to do was to make a ROM hack, and it's currently not posted publicly yet, but by the time this episode goes up, it might be. I'm still working on the changelog for it. It's a little rough around the edges because I have no experience doing DS hacking. I don't know how to do anything like change scripting or give you different gift Pokemon or put NPCs to block your progress in certain areas. So it's basically just vanilla Heart Gold and Soul Silver, but with a different level cap, or with a different level curve and more variety in terms of the Pokemon you're able to use. There's really no changes to the core experience, and in fact, I didn't even change the stats, abilities, or typings or anything like that of any of the Pokemon. So it's pretty much just the vanilla game, but with a little bit of tweaking to make the experience a bit more fun from my perspective. So I'm going to be posting that publicly soon. If it's not out by the time of this episode being put up, it will be soon, most likely. And the name is Pokemon Soul Silver Deluxe. I'm pretty sure that's what I settled on. I've tried to think of a cooler name, but I think Soul Silver Deluxe is what I'm going to go with. It's short and sweet, to the point. And if you're interested in that, I would ask you to check it out. Just search for it. It's probably going to be on my. I'm probably going to post it on the ROM hacking Pokemon subreddit, and also probably on like the ROM hack forums and stuff like that. The it's pretty basic, but if you want to just play a vanilla Heart Gold and Soul Silver with a little bit more variety in what you're able to use, then you can go ahead and play that. And I think I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope that people get some enjoyment out of it. Either way, uh, that's pretty much all I wanted to share, and because that's been eating up a lot of the past few weeks of my life is polishing up that and making the change log for it. I've been working on it for like months, but like on and off. So but it's done now. So yeah, I'm excited about that. I might go back for like a version 2.0. It only goes up to the end of Johto, so Kanto is not done yet at all. But the Johto experience is completely finished for the most part. There's probably like a few small things that I will want to tweak. Anyway, in terms of other stuff I'm doing, I've really just been watching more Hajime no Ippo, and I'm really getting into that show. I'm almost at the end of the first season, and I'm probably gonna stop after that and take a break. But goddamn, that show's so fucking good, and I highly recommend it if you haven't tried it yet. It's an absolutely amazing show, and you should watch it. It's great. Or manga. You can read the manga as well. It's also a manga. All right, I think that that's everything Let's see. I did the map gauntlet. I did news. I did everything that I'm doing. So yeah, that should be it. Like I said, next episode we're going to be tackling chapters 10, 11, and 11X. So I look forward to seeing you all then. But until then, have a nice rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.